Yeah, I want to say something real quick before I go to bed. I started to lay down and turned on my lights off, but I got back up here. Anyway, yeah, something about Geneva, Switzerland, and summit meetings. And something that I've been referring to as far as the separation between church and state, which seems to be really a big deal with the minimum requirement, in my mind involves the equator. And, the book, Secrets of the Temple, How the Federal Reserve Runs the Country, and there's like a little bit, quite a bit of history of the U.S. dollar that seems to go below the equator into South America, sometimes termed as Latin in legal terminology as some thought of a point of origin. How true that is only what's been provided as available information involving legal terminology, even in the paralegal sense as compared to the book Secrets of the Temple with some history of the U.S. dollar associating, a type of language normally identified as the legal terminology as a point of origin in Latin that seems to be some thought of available information as, instruction dictates, at least a paralegal, of course, anyway, in terminology involving Latin. And, what the equator means as compared to, Texas in North America, or, some realistic issue of computer architecture and platform that way, and what degree level is of opportunity, or the big O thing about opportunity, or what the equator is that way as compared to a degree level of like reputable standards of consensual participation, and what that is to that, as well as opportunity, or what that is to non-negotiable, non-transferable itemization, or degreed or non-degreed, or ratifying and codifying, or what that is to legal media and deposition, or the list goes on and on. Why a patent is not copyright, or the on behalf deal. What that really suggests as a factor of what representation is as compared to actual participation, or if it's going to represent a third person, or assimilating representation as original. And distinguishing whether or not if that's going to be the difference between de facto or practicum. And it would seem to be, even word of, come privilege, like in the, like the first several pages, but even before the preface, and some of the King James Version Bibles that represent like the universities that are involved with publications. And, in my mind, Cambridge and London, and several other, deals about the privilege. It seems to be the two big words that involve identifying, major universities involved with the King James Version and Christianity that way, and what that is to curriculum as compared to where the real deal about curriculum, in my mind, even the deal about the for Purple Mountain's Majesties, and really what that is to Purple being 88 in California, or Oldsmobile Delta 88, or what that is to even when the P is silent, and purple is like ERP, and my thing about why it ERP and the ERP and exclusionary rule provision, that way of, executive power, sovereign immunities, and executive power, sovereign immunities, and governmental amnesty. Let me phrase it like that, yeah. So anyway, yeah, it was just like something about the purple and the bird. But anyway, I was wanting to get to the Geneva, Switzerland thing about the separation between church and state. That seems to be a minimum requirement. What involves, the history of the U.S. dollar in the book Secrets of the Temple, How the Federal Reserve Runs the Country, and what that is below the equator, or what the equator is, and represent, even terms in office of presidential reference as ground zero, or what that is to even, sanitation, yeah, and that almighty, so you woke up, so I suppose you woke up one morning and decided you're going to be a Christian rock star, right? Excuse my toilet's white, right? But anyway, yeah, so, in any case, yeah, so it seems to be like really some real big deal about that, yeah, so a little bit of humor about that, but I'm not going to get in maybe later, but anyway, yeah, so the deal about the Geneva, Switzerland seems to be like the minimum requirement of the separation between church and state being, the symbolic and analytical of symbolic representation, as well as, Christianity, absolute Christianity, and as a point of origin of Israel, and the 6-point star, okay, and the code blue about the absolutes of a 90-degree right angle, which is, the absolute, in a horizontal, above and below, the 6-point star of the Israeli flag being the code blue thing about it, and what absolute value is all the way from algebra, all the way, beyond calculus into like physics and quantum, and what that is to attenuation and signal processing, um, even in legal media and deposition that way, or even television and electronic God, alphanumeric 130, or a telepathic eagle that way, and what the 13th alphanumeric value is of 99 in telepathic, and what a telepathic and a TP is to 36 in chase, or the pylon, or the cone shape on top of the seven, on top of the Statue of Liberty that way, what telepathic is to the pronunciation, more so of syllable than abbreviation, or initial, telepathic. It seems to be, like the TP thing, even the nativity point of origin of Native American Indian that way, and what they is to, all that, and even the DC during Christ thing, or the during circuit issue of a dimensional clause, and what access easement is to having fair use of easements, and what that is to intellectual in the way of what meaning of value of having, that during the lifespan, or the memory in that way of, you know, um, its value and duration, what intellectual really is, involving royalties, and not limited to, or what that is to even annuities, or it's charities, or not necessarily. I don't like call settlement. The thing about litigation, most people's perception of litigation normally seems to be a result of like settlement of an issue that seems to be something happened that was not supposed to happen. And it doesn't seem to be anything other than really ultimately getting to, like, a good day on a toilet, really ultimately, truthfully so, and gets Maxwell Smart kind of thing about it. Ultimately, it seems to be, the humor about it seems to be so much about, and it's really not degrading, but, I mean, really, but seriously, anyway, likewise, anyway, to move on with it, but the thing about the separation between church and state, it seems to be the minimum requirement of, the equator, and what the history of the U.S. dollar, and even legal terminology, and what Latin, and the pronunciation between long and short of Latin and latent, and what that is to, some unseen thing, sometimes even identified as a transition, even like a superimposium, that would give the impression of, even a principle, what that is to, even the transfiguration, or what that is to the rapture, or the Mount Olive thing, Book of Thessalonians. But anyway, it seems to be like the minimum requirement involving the equator and the operator. Being the Chevrolet, the operator, the bicentennial thing, what it is to the 200-year celebration, and the value of like 200, Lord Jesus Christ, plenipotentiary, transportation, and all that stuff. Okay, and ultimately, the HTTP, the operator being the zero deal, and the American and Israel, and the HTTP : and the 64 stuff about the HTTP, and ultimately getting, a whole bunch of stuff about, 64, and that way involving, ultimately getting to Zion, and it seems to be like the color code of the separation between church and state for the minimum requirement, and it seems to be like the big deal about Geneva, Switzerland, and human capital and human civil rights, that way that seems to be, going beyond business and corporate law, involving, human civil rights, and in the way of what even political science majors would see involving like international banking systems, or what that means in circuit, or even United Nations in a way, representing what plain horizons is in importing and exporting that way, what domestic gross national product is, or domestic that way, or what implementation is in political science, or some source of like warehousing and importing and exporting, and what that is to a circuit. That way, or implementation in the way of political science terminology, and the way, or I mean, the list goes on and on. What having the right to assemble is to the freedom of speech, and all that, or the why the Fifth Amendment is not a non-profit organization, or why it seems to be terminology in real estate monopolizing whether or not that the North American Free Trade Act is going to like be an idea of like monopolizing like what would be a residential neighborhood, in a way of what intellectual means of easement. That's my thing about it. It seems to be the big deal about, in my mind, Geneva, Switzerland. How true it is about the BN venue. It just seems to be like an immediate thing of like a very vague memory, of like something about it, yeah. And something about the Bureau of Printing and Engraving, And what that is too, it seems to be like the real big deal in my mind of like what was like a 1992 map, showing a whole bunch of horizontal rectangle shapes on the U.S. map. Um, Most of them identified as restricted areas, and in a red color, and not all of them were like restricted areas or red, but predominantly, I mean, the majority, I mean, probably 90, at least a minimum of 90% would probably be, the one and only year that I know of it actually being that. But it seems to be the rectangle. It seems ultimately getting to really the deal about, Cadillac and Lincoln, and what the deal is about the penny, or, uh, um, in that way of Abraham Lincoln, and it's a known fact about Abraham Lincoln, that he had studied in the dark, or what that is to night vision. Um, Abraham Lincoln was like known as one of the presidents that actually studied like in the dark, And my thing about the night vision is like the 13-band graphic equalizer, and what the 13 colonies is to maybe plantation of color code that would represent like American history that way, or Vernon State of Texas Statutes Annotated, or Deep Star 6 in a way of what night vision would be, in the depths of the ocean, as compared to, and still be night vision with nanoluminance, the issue, and the clarity of what infinity is of a zoom lens of like, an infinite, clarity, like perfect 1010 vision of like zoom lenses, or even in a planetarium that way, of perfect 1010 vision. And what that is to the figure eight, or a 90-degree right angle of the figure eight, and what that is to a thermocouple semiconductor, or the Pentagon, the drummer, and all that stuff about the thermocouple semiconductor that way, even of magistration of like orchestrated, choreographed, waveform of perfection of like a symphony, as compared to like a drummer. Um, Once again, it seems to be like the deal about the separation between church and state being a minimum requirement of the United States codes annotated, at the beginning level of what seems to be, involving the 12 Federal Reserve Banks, that as a prerequisite at a federal level for the United States codes annotated, and something about the Christian religion and what that is, the King James Version Bible, and or is or is not, or some transition, that might be, maybe the naivety of religion, knowing that the Book of Mormon, the Mormon Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, being the American thing about religion and Christianity that way. Not ignoring the King James Version Bible, yet there seems to be the deal about the 200-year celebration of America, and and where it actually originated from, and what the deal is about English. I mean, it seems to be ultimately the deal about the Geneva, Switzerland, and the human capital factor. Seemingly, what would be maybe an acceptance corporation, or what is considered three-dimensional, beyond the endorsement or the signature, or what participation means beyond a flat plane surface of like written, like for it is written, like it seems to be like for the like biggest deal about the two-plane, flat plane, 180-degree flat surfaces of like 180-degree, or telepathic answer that way, and isometrics involved of even blueprints, suggesting that projected estimates, or actual participation would be go beyond the written, or what would be considered even academic, or whether if participation is going to actually be a result of academics, or maybe neglect based upon lack of experience, or maybe through default by ignorance, not that it'd been a giveaway, or a free trade act between a name and identity of an endorsement, or given some like history of some like retroactive presidential administration, being ignored with any retroactive anything other than like sitting on it, right? But anyway, something about that involving Mount Rushmore likewise in addition, and what that is to proper English numerical composition. But getting back to the Geneva, Switzerland thing about the human capital and the isometrics, and what that is beyond business and corporate law, seems to be like the real big deal going to a circuit in international banking systems, that showing that the representation would require in my mind a minimum requirement of like knowing what the equator is to an operator, and what that is to the color code of like the Lord Jesus Christ, and the plenipotentiary and transportation and all that stuff about the ultimately even getting to the VPN, and what that is to international participation of the alphanumerics 152 in a telepathic heart that way, or what a telepathic VPN, a vice president network, or a via plenipotentiary network is to the alphanumerics of an international being in that way of like a telepathic card. In any case, I mean, it ultimately gets to like even the deal about Hopsing, and instead of painting like the golden arches at McDonald's, in my mind of Sarbanes and Oxley, as well as Sox and Goldman that way of like John Wayne and Wyatt Earp and that Hopsing thing. I mean, those are the only two that really seems to be the big deal about the Delta Force and what international floating accounts is through liquid equity in that way of interest-bearing accountability beyond the confines of the beach, right? Or some amphibious participating, beyond painting for gold into the, the jaywalk thing about, the pearls and what Calamity Jane is to the, the Pony Express and all that symbolic representation of electronic power, the horseshoe being like representative of the ohms. And, predominantly like the minimum requirement is normally like 8 ohms of like PA systems, the PA thing, or a public announcement, or presidential announcement, or private announcement, normally of like venue. It's normally where PA speakers is normally, and that's probably, the exact reason, is that normally when performances involving an audience is requiring a PA system that way. And it being, whether or not if the PA system is really going to equate, system being, the 101, or, the Christian thing about, alphanumerics, or even a division that way, a PA system. I mean, the alphanumerics of system is like the alphanumerics of 101, and what it is to, a PA system that way. A division, a system, a Christian thing, or like Highway 101 in like Los Angeles, or like right here, something about, an avenue right here in Pearland, right? Anyway, yeah, so likewise, in addition, it seems to be like a deal about that, and my mind, what civil rights issue, or like what no discrimination, or if civil rights is going to focus on a civil rights issue, and if the only thing about civil rights is at that level going through the circuit, and it seems to be the only issue of isometrics of actual participation beyond, what would be maybe considered a degree level, and what opportunity is or is not as compared to what participating in the circuit is or is not. Or, maybe what intellectual might not realize, or maybe what designation means, or the perception of what participation might only be intent, and who knows what. What's to be expected, and what available information is anticipated to be reflect maybe the perception of an experience, and that's my thing about it, is that ultimately it seems to be like the Geneva, Switzerland. How true it is about the being venue in Geneva, Switzerland, although the summit meetings reflecting, some flag things that would be representative, how true it is, and I'll have to actually decide if I'm really going to look, but if the flags are the same or not the same, even at the World Bank, or what it is to the United Nations or the General Assembly, or even Geneva, Switzerland, in a way, what seems to be beyond the business and corporate law, and to the monetary domestic and gross national product of the aggregates, beyond the executive classroom, and to the expenditures of, like a real military time in that way, or what would represent maybe even the State of the Union address, and in that way that would reflect, the next step of, the real deal about the military, or what civil rights is in that way to Geneva, and if that's really going to be the issue of a UN sanction, or NATO. I've seen NAFTA, with and without the F. I've seen it as a North American free trade, and NATO, and it's kind of like a North American treaty organization as compared to, I've seen it with the P, and the North American Peace Treaty Agreement. It's kind of like I've seen it both ways. Actually, I've heard it both ways, but I've never seen it like NATO with a P, with a NAPTO. But that's like a deal about a tractor and a protractor and a 180-degree thing about a protractor and the pronunciation. I mean, so for real, 180 degrees and telepathic answer, and the PTO, what that is to, the real deal about drive. And, I mean, for real, and transmission, what that is to measuring cycles per second oscillation, like a PTO and a tractor. It seems to be like the real deal of I mean, a whole lot of really studying analytically. I mean, a huge amount of information, and really, seeing something, grasping what available information really means. in that way. So I mean, it seems to be like something even involving the rainbow, an identical twin rainbow, and something about the other factors. But it seems to be the being venue. How true it is. It's almost like a Sammy Hagar song. Human beings song. And there's something in my mind about that. Sammy Hagar singing that song, "Humans Being," yeah, "Shine On, Shine On." But in any case, yeah, I mean, when I saw that, I mean, it's kind of like a vague memory that something that I've talked about, but I'm really not going to talk about it right now. But something about that specific place and how true it is. Um, yeah, pretty sure I've seen it both with and without the being venue on it. Or the suggestion maybe another place virtually identical in that way that would represent the summit meetings and the flags as compared to the venue, um, and what that is to even a presidential inaugural ball in that way. What is in my mind in 1992 is like the landmark of like the century, a presidential with like William Jefferson Clinton and Chevy Chase actually hosting the inaugural ball that way. I mean, it seems to be like the presidential thing about some major huge change like in the entire situation in the United States in various places of importing and exporting that way. Yeah, so I mean, it seems to be like a huge deal about that in my mind about that, and Chevy Chase in a lot of his movies in gesture he used to gesture quite a bit about the Native American Indian thing, and all that telepathic stuff, and Chevy Chase being his first and last being 99 or the 13 being 99, the 13 stars above the eagle thing, or what telepathic the TP is to the Native American Indian and the Statue of Liberty that way, or 36 in oil and a whole bunch of stuff between 36 and 64 equating to like something about the century and the 100 in the Power Squared getting into the 200-year celebration, the centennial Power Squared factor practical application applied that way, getting into the bicentennial and all that stuff about the bicentennial deal, Richard Nixon, and really it seems to be ultimately getting even to the thermocouple semiconductor in that way of the V twin. And in my mind, also, it seems to be involving like Sarah and Abraham and Joseph that way, of Chase Practicum Joseph being alphanumerics of 213, or telepathic brainwaves, or the area code of Los Angeles, and in my mind, ultimately getting to the 109 is 110 and equals like 247. And my thing about the United States Secretary of Treasury, Robert E. Rubin, and a thing about the telepathic Robert E. Rubin deal, and the list goes on and on about 247, and in my mind about international floating account, and what that is to the Southwest. I mean, that's 247 degrees seems to be like, like it to me personally, and something about the United States Supreme Court Southwest Court Reporter. I'm not limited to Southwestern Bell, the code blue thing about it, but likewise in addition, like AT&T and still the blue color code of like network operations. Yeah, so anyway, I have my thing about AT&T and Southwestern Bell that way, and the 247 thing about the, the United States, Supreme Court Southwest Court Reporter, and, thing about de facto and General Motors that way. Yeah, and Chase Practicum, I mean, it seems to be, whether or not, why litigation is not the de facto, or the Chase Practicum being, like the alphanumerics of 140, likewise the word itself, alphanumerics and attenuation and alphanumerics and all that stuff about Holy Miracles, Purple Heart, and what the Purple Heart is. And it ultimately gets to, the pronunciation of, for Purple Mountain's majesty and what that is to a plateau, or a plane horizon that way, or, some barometric altimeter representing an equator, or a plane horizon of importing and exporting, or some chosen, deal about, for Purple Mountain's majesties, or, the P is silent and it's ERP, for ERP, Mountain's majesties, the exclusionary rule of the ERP, pronouncing of URP, and the same pronunciation as ERP, like the Wyatt Earp and John Wayne deal and the Hopsing thing. And it seems to be like so significant as compared to the Golden Arches of like McDonald's and my mind of Sarbanes and Oxley, and Wyatt Earp and John Wayne and the Panning for Gold, seemingly so much of like, Sox and Goldman of the New York Stock Exchange, as well as like hedge funds and international monetary funding. The information can really be found in like the book House of Cards. Um, a little bit of history of like Sox and Goldman that would give the indication analytically, something about Wyatt Earp and John Wayne. A hop thing I'm not real sure about, but it seems to be like the deal about ultimately getting to even something about Calamity Jane and the Pony Express, during the Gold Rush days, and what that is to like current resident. Ultimately, in my mind, getting to the 100 Club in the hospital, and what that is to medical power of attorney, and what if you're in real estate, and all that stuff about it, and what that is to hospitality, or what ultimately it gets to. I mean, if it ultimately gets to hospitality in a way, and ultimately getting to what the venue is, and knowing if it needs to be, admitting diagnosis, or just a known fact that's available information, just on television of, just programming of available information that way of what the admitting diagnosis is, as compared to like a med student as a resident, as compared to what that is to real estate in neighborhoods, as compared to like a med student being identified as a resident. And people might not see themselves as a resident, or in need of attention that way. What the perception of management is based upon non-degreed or degreed or non-degreed, or what's considered acceptable that way, whether it's going to be the issue of method banking of like non-negotiable non-transferable optimization based upon the fact of the North American Free Trade Act, or what Social Security ultimately gets to, having the right to assemble like a bunch of transactions at the bank, but ultimately my mind, ultimately getting what what that gets, beyond the business and corporate law that way, beyond executive classroom, going through a circuit. It seems to be, like a big deal about Geneva, Switzerland, and what human capital is, and what, capital investment and human capital is to like investment, as compared to a storage area network, or securities and annuities that way, and same thing the difference between human capital and terminology of investment, terminology that way, and the managing factors of what participation is, and in that way identifying what investment is, as compared to maybe what would be considered earned or a given, or the real deal about whether or not if a direct deposit is only a retroactive participation of whether through neglect based upon lack of experience would only identify whether if a name and identity had been increased based upon what managing factors would only present as intellectual or duration of lifespan, or what claim is of having fair use is of international law that way, or or the on behalf thing, or what litigation might only suggest as settlement, not necessarily de facto at all, or what practicum is to de facto, or learn as I go, like forbearance, like on a tour, or what re-entering heavy means beyond so get smart, get macro smart, yeah, for real. So I mean ultimately it seems to be a little bit of humor about that really is like the real deal. I mean, for real. I mean, it's so seems to be it, sometimes. Yeah, truthfully so. So in any case, so it seems to be that the human capital and the deal about the minimum requirements of the equator being the operator, or Chevrolet, or the bicentennial issue, as compared to the 64 and the 0, and HTTP and programming, or what programming codes are to programming legal codes in the alphanumerics of like 200. And the legal tender deal about the programming legal tender codes, and what that is to the alphanumerics of 200 that way, or a plenipotentiary, or even the Lord Jesus Christ, and what the minimum requirements are for the separation between church and state. That ultimately gets to the Zion being 64 of HTTP : // or the humor about the night vision, like the Houston Oilers and all that oil, and moving to the Tennessee Titans, and what that is to a marginal spread of a tennis court, and legal terminology even in the New York Stock Exchange that way, or even a 90-degree right angle of really a quadrant of even a 90-degree right angle of a baseball field, and the seams about the connectivity of what that is and is not. even to infinity, and the clarity of perfect vision of, like, even, in a planetarium, of astrology and photography in the way of a zoom lens, that way, So anyway, it seems to be like a real big deal about human civil rights that way. That would be like a requirement that, although of expenditures of military and service, that would require, something about human civil rights, and not necessarily articles of incorporation that would maybe dictate whether or not, if um, litigation is only an international prejudice of what de facto might only suggest what having fair use is, and how it's used, or how that affects maybe a person or a neighborhood, or what is, in my mind, a degree level of opportunity of what non-negotiable, non-transferable itemization is of residential areas and neighborhoods, and what monopolizing only suggests management is that way of a daily standard transaction at the bank, of increasing the name and the identity and the value, and whether if acknowledging participation is maybe only a perception of knowing or not knowing. But anyway, this is already going on, God, 31 minutes right now. So I have a considerable amount to say about quite a bit, but it seems to be a big deal about the being venue, and how true it is if it's the being venue all the time, or it seems to be something about what that is to, in my mind, the 1992 presidential inaugural ball, and the William Jefferson Chevy Chase thing about the inaugural ball, and what the being venue is of Geneva, Switzerland, the summit meetings, and what a host is to a presidential deal about the civil rights, or what that is to isometrics of participation of a name and identity being used and increased that way, beyond like North American free trade, or the Reese statute, or what early retirement is, to the acronym of in my mind, of investments and securities and annuities, not necessarily a early retirement of an individual supplemental security or supplemental annuity. It's an acronym, and that's exactly what it is. And how it's used is only a perception of where it's at, at a degree level, and what opportunity is either knowing or not knowing, and what having fair use is to intellectual in that way, and if anyone recognizes what that is and is not, to what participation might only seem, or maybe not even significant, because there doesn't seem to be participation at all, and that's really what it is, and not being naive to that fact. So anyway, I'm going to kind of like stop right there. It's going on 33 minutes right now, and I'm going to get this much, maybe 2 videos in on, uploaded to youtube.com at WadeASVPriddy, and also WadeASV, Pretty Priddy, 192. Yeah, all right, yeah, okay. So I'll see you later. Talk to you later, okay.